I found out I'd secretly funded my sister's entire wedding the same way I find out most things in my family, by accident while trying to be invisible. It was Labor Day weekend and Aunt Peggy had insisted on hosting one of her elaborate backyard gatherings at her place in Lakewood. The air smelled like charcoal and cut grass, and someone had set up a folding table covered in pasta salads that had been sitting in the sun too long. I was standing near the drinks cooler, holding a sweating bottle of lemonade when I heard my name. Not said to me. About me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My cousin Brittany was talking to someone I didn't recognize, probably one of Eric's relatives already getting introduced to the family ecosystem. They were maybe 10 feet away, half hidden behind the corner of Aunt Peggy's garage. Brittany's voice carried the way it always did when she'd had exactly 2 glasses of wine, loud enough to sound confident but just unfocused enough to forget discretion. She's always been like this, Brittany said. Kind of awkward. Never really figured out how to fit in, you know? My aunt says she's been the family embarrassment since high school. Never had a serious boyfriend, lives alone in that tiny apartment, works some computer job nobody really understands. I think she makes decent money but you'd never know it by looking at her. The person she was talking to made some vague sympathetic sound. I stood very still. The lemonade bottle was cold enough that my palm had gone numb. It's sad really, Brittany continued. Mandy's wedding is going to be so beautiful, and I know Tori's going to show up in something outdated and probably cry through the ceremony. She's always been too emotional. My mom says it's because she never processed losing Uncle Frank properly. Just throws herself into work and pretends everything's fine. I set the lemonade down on the nearest surface and walked away. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Just a smooth turn and a steady pace toward the side gate that led to the driveway. Nobody noticed. They never did. I sat in my car for 20 minutes with the windows up and the engine off. The steering wheel was hot under my hands. Through the windshield I could see the party continuing without interruption. My mother was laughing at something Uncle Richard said. Mandy was showing off her engagement ring to a small circle of admirers for what must have been the 4th time that afternoon. Aunt Peggy was arranging something on the dessert table, her mouth moving in that constant stream of commentary she called conversation. The family embarrassment. I turned the phrase over in my mind like a stone. It wasn't the cruelty that surprised me. Aunt Peggy had been taking small cuts at me for years, usually disguised as concern. Tori, honey, have you thought about trying a dating app? Tori, when are you going to do something with that hair? Tori, you know what might help? A little confidence. What surprised me was how clearly they'd all discussed it. How it had become accepted fact. The official family narrative. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. The screen took a moment to load. When it did, I navigated to my savings account and stared at the balance. $32,418. It had been nearly $70,000 3 months ago. I opened my photos and scrolled back to June. There it was. A picture I'd taken of a cashier's check made out to Gabrielle Martinez, the wedding planner Mandy had hired. $35,000. The memo line said, Bennett Thornton wedding full payment. I'd written that check on a Tuesday afternoon during my lunch break. Mandy had called me the night before, her voice high and frantic in that way it got when she was about to ask for something she knew was unreasonable. The wedding venue had a strict payment schedule and she and Eric had come up short. Way short. Mom had already contributed what she could. Eric's parents had maxed out what they'd promised. The wedding planner was threatening to release the date if they didn't pay the remaining balance by end of week. I can't lose this venue, Tori. I can't. We've planned everything around it. The invitations have the address. People have booked hotels. If we have to change locations now it'll look like we couldn't afford it. Like we're not serious. Please. I know it's a lot but I'll pay you back. Promise. As soon as we get wedding gifts and tax returns and everything settles. Promise. I'd said yes before she finished explaining. I always said yes. The check had cleared within 48 hours. The wedding was secured. Mandy had sent me a text that said, "You're a lifesaver," followed by 3 heart emojis. Then nothing. No mention of the money. No updates on repayment plans. Just a seamless transition into wedding planning mode, complete with venue tours and cake tastings and bridesmaids drama that I heard about secondhand through my mother's phone calls. And now here I was, sitting in a hot car outside Aunt Peggy's house. The family embarrassment. The one who didn't fit. The one they tolerated out of obligation. I looked back at the party through my windshield. Mandy had moved to the patio and was taking selfies with Brittany and Derek. Everyone was smiling. Everything was perfect. I started the car and drove home. My apartment in Lohi was small, but I'd made it mine. Exposed brick on one wall. Plants I actually remembered to water lined up on the windowsill. A gallery wall of photos I'd taken on various hikes back when I had time for hiking. I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door and stood in the middle of the living room, not sure what to do with myself. The rational part of my brain said I was overreacting. So Brittany had said something mean. So Aunt Peggy had opinions. So what? I'd known for years that I didn't quite fit their mold. I didn't perform femininity the way they expected. I didn't date loudly or publicly. I didn't center my life around finding a husband or hosting dinner parties or any of the other things Aunt Peggy considered markers of successful womanhood. But the irrational part, the part that still felt like the 20-year-old who'd watched her father die and then had to become the stable one because someone had to be, that part was screaming. That part wanted to burn something down. Instead, I opened my laptop. I need to back up. I need to explain how I became this person. The one everyone calls when they need something but nobody remembers when it comes time to celebrate. It didn't happen overnight. It was incremental. A series of small moments that added up to a role I never auditioned for. When my father died 8 years ago, I was a junior in college. Mandy was 16 and still in high school. Mom fell apart in the way that people do when the center of their world disappears without warning. Dad had been the organizer, the planner, the one who remembered everyone's birthdays and scheduled the oil changes and knew where the insurance papers were kept. When he died of a heart attack on a completely ordinary Wednesday, we discovered that none of us knew how to run the household. I came home. I took a semester off that turned into a year. I learned how to sort medical bills and deal with insurance companies and cook meals that weren't pasta with Jared sauce. I held Mandy while she cried and listened to Mom stare at the wall and talk about how she couldn't remember how Frank liked his coffee, which seemed to represent some larger failure she couldn't articulate. When I finally went back to school, I did it part-time. Online classes. I finished my degree in computer science 2 years late, while working full-time at a tech startup that didn't care about traditional timelines as long as I could code. By the time I graduated, I'd become the family's de facto problem solver. Computer broken? Call Tori. Need help moving? Call Tori. Can't figure out your taxes? Call Tori. I didn't mind. Not at first. Felt good to be useful. It felt like I was honoring something my father would have wanted, keeping everyone together, keeping things functional. But somewhere along the way, being useful became being invisible. My own life, the things I wanted or needed or dreamed about, became secondary. Background noise. The family would ask how I was doing in that perfunctory way people do when they're really just waiting for their turn to talk, and before I could answer with anything substantive, they'd already be pivoting to their own updates. Mandy's college graduation, her new job, her relationship with Eric, her promotion, her engagement. Each milestone was a family event. We rallied. We celebrated. We made a fuss. My promotion to senior developer at 26, a title people usually didn't get until their 30s, was acknowledged with a text from my mother that said, "That's wonderful, honey," followed by, "Do you think you could help Mandy move next weekend? She's finally getting that apartment in Cap Hill." I helped her move. Of course I did. The wedding had been the culmination. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Mandy got engaged last November, right before Thanksgiving. She'd announced it at Thanksgiving dinner, actually, holding up her hand so the diamond caught the light. Everyone had gasped and applauded. Aunt Peggy had immediately started talking about venues and dates, and whether a spring or fall wedding made more sense. Mom had cried. Uncle Richard had made a toast. I'd been in the kitchen refilling the water pitcher when it happened. By the time I came back, the conversation had moved on to color schemes. Over the following months, wedding planning consumed every family gathering. Mandy would arrive with her phone full of Pinterest boards and questions. Should the bridesmaids wear navy or dusty blue? Were uplighting and string lights redundant? What about a Esmores bar for the reception? I'd contributed opinions when asked. I'd gone to the group bridesmaid dress fitting even though I wasn't a bridesmaid. Mandy had chosen her college roommate and Eric's sister and Brittany. When Mom had gently suggested including me, Mandy had said she wanted to keep the bridal party small, and anyway, wouldn't I rather just enjoy the wedding as a guest? Wouldn't that be less stressful? I'd agreed because what else was I supposed to say? Then came June and the money crisis. Mandy had been sobbing on the phone. The Broadmoor wasn't just a venue, it was her dream. She'd been talking about getting married there since she was 14. They had this garden space with a view of Cheyenne Mountain, and the buildings had this old-world elegance that she built her entire wedding aesthetic around. Losing it wasn't just a logistical problem. It was a symbolic failure. "I'll pay you back," she'd said. "I swear. The second we can." I'd believed her. Or maybe I'd wanted to believe her. Or maybe it didn't matter because I was going to give her the money either way. $35,000. More than half my savings. Money I'd been putting away for years with a vague plan about eventually buying a condo, or maybe taking a real vacation or just having security. Gone in one check. And here's the thing nobody tells you about giving people money. Once you do it, you can't ever ask about it again without becoming the villain. You can't say, "Hey, remember that enormous sum I gave you?" without sounding petty. So you just swallow it. You watch them live their life, funded partially by your sacrifice, and you smile and nod and pretend the resentment isn't growing. I sat on my couch with my laptop and pulled up Google Flights. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. I just knew I needed to be somewhere else. Somewhere I wouldn't have to think about family embarrassment or funding weddings or any of it. The cursor blinked in the destination field. I typed random cities. Portland, Austin, Nashville. Nothing felt right. Then, almost without thinking, I typed Sedona. I'd never been to Arizona. I'd seen pictures of the Red Rocks and had a vague sense that it was supposed to be spiritual or healing or whatever people said about desert landscapes. The flights were reasonable. There were last-minute rentals available. It was far enough to feel like an escape, but close enough that I wouldn't have to take more than a few days off work. The wedding was in 3 weeks. September 28th. A Saturday. I booked a flight for September 25th. Return flight October 2nd. I would miss the wedding entirely. My hands were shaking slightly as I confirmed the purchase. This wasn't like me. I didn't bail. I didn't disappear. I showed up. Always. Even when I wasn't wanted, I was there, reliable and steady and useful. But something had cracked at Aunt Peggy's barbecue. Some load-bearing wall inside me that had been holding up too much for too long. I didn't want to watch my sister get married in a venue I'd paid for while being introduced to distant relatives as the family embarrassment. I didn't want to paste on a smile and sit in whatever back corner seat they'd assign me and pretend this was fine. I wanted to be somewhere where nobody knew me, where I had no role to play, where I could just exist without the weight of expectation or judgment or obligation. Sedona. Red Rocks. Silence. I closed my laptop and sat in the dimming light of my apartment. Outside, the city was moving into evening. I could hear traffic from nearby streets, voices from the brewery on the corner, the ambient hum of a Friday night beginning. My phone buzzed. A text from Mom. "Did you leave Aunt Peggy's? I looked around and couldn't find you. Hope you're feeling okay. Love you." I stared at the message. She hadn't noticed I was gone for over 2 hours. Nobody had. I didn't respond. Instead, I got up and walked to my bedroom closet. In the back, behind winter coats I rarely needed in Denver's relatively mild climate, was a box. I pulled it down and opened it. Inside were things of my father's. A watch. Some cufflinks. His wedding ring that my mother had given me because she couldn't stand to look at it anymore. And his journal. Dad had kept a daily journal for as long as I could remember. Nothing fancy. Just a worn leather notebook where he'd write a few lines each night. Observations. Thoughts. Little moments. After he died, I'd found years' worth of them in his office. Mom had wanted to throw them away, said it hurt too much to see his handwriting. I'd kept them all. I pulled out the last one. The entry stopped abruptly mid-May, 2 weeks before he died. I flipped to a random page. April 7th. Tori called today from school. She sounded tired. I asked if she was taking care of herself and she changed the subject to a programming project. She does that. Deflects. I worry she's so busy taking care of others she forgets she needs care too. Reminds me of her mother in that way. The best people often forget they deserve the same kindness they give. I closed the journal and held it against my chest. The apartment was quiet except for the sound of my own breathing. The family embarrassment. The one who didn't fit. The one who gave $35,000 and got called awkward behind her back. I put the journal back and closed the box. Then I pulled out my phone and opened a new text to my mother. I'm fine. Just tired. See you soon. I hit send before I could overthink it. Then I opened my work calendar and submitted a vacation request for the week of the wedding. My manager approved it within 10 minutes. I had more than enough PTO saved up. Another symptom of being someone who never took time for herself. 3 weeks. I had 3 weeks to get through. 3 weeks of wedding updates and fittings and rehearsal dinner plans that I'd hear about but not be included in. 3 weeks of pretending I didn't know what Brittany had said, what Aunt Peggy thought, what my role in this family actually was. And then I'd disappear. Not forever. Just long enough to remember what it felt like to be something other than useful. I didn't tell anyone about Sedona. Not my mother, not Mandy, not even Harper, my best friend who usually knew everything about my life before I'd fully processed it myself. There was something protective about keeping it secret, like if I said it out loud someone would find a way to talk me out of it or worse, find a way to make it about them. The 3 weeks crawled and sprinted simultaneously. Work kept me busy enough during the day. We were in the middle of a product launch and I'd spend 8 or 9 hours staring at code, debugging, attending meetings where people use words like synergy and pivot without irony. It was mind-numbing and perfect. I didn't have to think about anything except whether the authentication module would hold up under load testing. But evenings were different. That's when my phone would light up with the family group chat, a thread I'd muted years ago but still checked compulsively, the way you can't help touching a bruise to see if it still hurts. The messages were constant. Mandy posting photos of flower arrangements with captions like, "Can't decide between peonies and garden roses. Help." Mom responding with strings of heart emojis. Aunt Peggy weighing in with essays about how her wedding had featured roses and they'd held up beautifully in the photographs, which somehow turned into a story about her honeymoon in Cape Cod and how young people today didn't appreciate classic elegance. Brittany posted a photo of her bridesmaid dress with the caption 3 weeks, until I'm standing up there with my gorgeous cousin. Derek commented with a gif of someone popping champagne. Uncle Richard sent a thumbs up emoji, his only form of digital communication. Nobody asked me anything. Nobody said, "Tori, what do you think?" Or, "Tori, can you make it to the rehearsal dinner?" I was in the chat. I could see everything. But I was atmospheric like wallpaper. On September 10th, Mandy posted a long sentimental message about how blessed she felt and how she couldn't wait to marry her best friend and how grateful she was for everyone's support during the planning process. She tagged Eric, Mom, both sets of parents, all 3 bridesmaids, the wedding planner, even the photographer. The post had 47 comments within an hour. I read it twice, searching for my name. It wasn't there. That night I lay in bed staring at my ceiling and did the math. $35,000 for the venue. I'd also sent her $1,500 in April when she needed deposits for the photographer. Another $800 in May for the dress alterations because apparently the sample size didn't fit right and custom work wasn't included in the original price. Then there was the $600 I'd contributed to the bachelorette party in July, a weekend trip to Santa Fe that I hadn't been invited on but was asked to help fund because everyone's chipping in and it wouldn't be fair if we left you out of the group gift. $37,900. I'd given my sister nearly $38,000 in 5 months. My savings account that had once held $70,000, money I'd accumulated through years of living below my means and taking on freelance coding projects and skipping vacations, now had $32,000. I'd lost more than half of it. And my sister had thanked a photographer on social media but not me. I got up and walked to my window. Denver at night was a grid of light stretching toward the dark mass of the mountains. Somewhere out there, Mandy was probably looking at wedding Pinterest boards or texting Eric about seating charts. Mom was maybe watching TV in the house I'd helped her keep after Dad died, the mortgage I'd contributed to when her real estate commissions dried up during the recession. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass and felt something I'd been avoiding for weeks. Not anger exactly. Something quieter and more final. Resignation maybe. Or clarity. They didn't value me. They valued what I could do for them. My phone buzzed. A text from Mom. Can you pick up Aunt Dot from the airport next Thursday? Her flight gets in at 2:15. I have a showing I can't move. Aunt Dot was my grandmother, my father's mother, flying in from Tucson for the wedding. She was 82 and sharp as ever, the only member of the family who'd never made me feel inadequate. But the request was so perfectly representative of how things worked. No, are you free? No, would you mind? Just the assumption that I'd rearrange my day because I always did. I looked at my calendar. September 19th. I'd be at work. I'd have to leave early, fight traffic to DIA, wait at the cell phone lot, navigate the chaos of passenger pickup, drive her back to Mom's house, which was the opposite direction from my apartment. 2.5 hours minimum, probably 3. I typed back, I have a work thing. That day, sorry. Then I deleted it. Typed can't, I'll be in meetings. Deleted that too. Finally I just wrote, I'm not available that day. I hit send before I could soften it with apologies or explanations. The message showed as delivered. Then the 3 dots appeared. The universal signal that someone was typing a response. They appeared and disappeared twice. Finally a message came through. Oh, okay. I'll figure something out. That was it. No guilt trip. No passive aggression. Just acceptance. It felt almost anticlimactic, like I'd been bracing for an argument that never came. 10 minutes later, another text. This one from Mandy. Mom said you can't get Grandma? What's going on? I stared at the message. What's going on? As if my unavailability was a crisis that required investigation. I have plans, I typed back. What kind of plans? Personal ones. The 3 dots again. A longer pause this time. Then, is everything okay? You've been kind of distant lately. I almost laughed. Distant. I'd been exactly where I always was, in the background, available and useful. The only thing that had changed was that I'd said no to one request. Everything's fine, I wrote. Just busy with work. Okay, she responded. Then after a beat, let me know if you need to talk or whatever. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound bitter. And I was trying very hard not to be the bitter one. I was trying to just quietly extract myself without leaving scorch marks. The next few days passed in a strange fugue state. I went to work. I came home. I started researching things to do in Sedona, even though I had no real plan beyond being somewhere else. Hiking trails, vortex sites, scenic overlooks. I read reviews of them with the kind of focus I usually reserved for technical documentation. On September 15th, exactly 10 days before my flight, I went to Stella's Brew, the coffee shop 3 blocks from my apartment. It was a Sunday morning and I woken up with anxious energy I needed to walk off. The place was busy with the post-church crowd and people doing laptop work. I ordered a courte-à-deux and found a small table near the window. I was reading an article on my phone about Devil's Bridge Trail when someone said my name. I looked up. It was Ian, a colleague from work, standing with a to-go cup and a surprised smile. Tori, hey. I almost didn't recognize you outside the office. I smiled back, slipping my phone into my pocket. Yeah, I do occasionally leave the building. He laughed. What are you up to? Taking a break from the launch madness? Something like that. Just needed to get out of my apartment. He gestured to the empty chair at my table. Mind if I sit for a second? My legs are dead from a bike ride. Sure. He sat down with a grateful sigh, stretching his legs out. Ian was one of the few people at work I actually talked to beyond project specifics. He was a UX designer, funny and easygoing, the kind of person who remembered details about your life and asked follow-up questions. So, he said, taking a sip of his coffee, big plans for the rest of the weekend? Not really. Just trying to relax before things get hectic. Right, the wedding. Your sister's getting married soon, right? You mentioned it a while back. I was surprised he remembered. I'd mentioned it once, probably in passing during a lunch break. Yeah, end of the month. That's exciting. Are you in the wedding party? No, just a guest. He nodded, not pressing, but I could tell he'd noticed the flatness in my voice. Still, family weddings can be a lot. Lots of obligations and expectations. You have no idea. He smiled sympathetically. My sister got married 2 years ago, and I spent the entire weekend being asked when I was going to settle down. By the end, I was ready to fake my own death. I laughed, genuine and surprised. That sounds terrible. It was. But hey, open bar made it tolerable. He paused, studying me for a moment. You doing okay? You seem kind of stressed. It was such a simple question, asked with actual concern, and it hit me harder than it should have. When was the last time someone had asked if I was okay, and actually waited for a real answer? Honestly, I don't know. Family stuff is complicated. It always is. He leaned back in his chair. For what it's worth, you're allowed to take space from complicated. You don't owe anyone access to you just because you're related. I looked at him, this person who barely knew me, saying exactly what I needed to hear. Thanks. I think I'm starting to figure that out. Good. He finished his coffee and stood up. Well, I should get going. But hey, if you need to vent or just want to grab coffee and complain about family, I'm around. I might take you up on that. He waved and headed out. I sat there for a while longer, watching people come and go, feeling something in my chest loosen slightly. That afternoon I did something I hadn't done in months. I went hiking. Just a short trail in Red Rocks Park, nothing ambitious, but it felt good to move, to be outside, to focus on nothing but foot placement and breathing. At the top of the trail there was a view of the valley, the city sprawling below, mountains rising in the distance. I took a photo. Not a good one, just a quick shot on my phone, slightly washed out by the afternoon sun. I looked at it for a moment, then impulsively posted it to my Instagram story. No caption. No location tag. Just the image. Within minutes, the views started ticking up. I watched them passively, not really caring but also unable to look away. Mandy viewed it. Then Mom. Then Brittany. None of them responded. They just looked and moved on. That night, Mandy posted a photo of herself and Eric at some upscale restaurant downtown, both of them dressed up and smiling. The caption said, "Last date night before we're married. 3 weeks and counting." The comments flooded in immediately. Friends posting congratulations and heart emojis. Aunt Peggy writing an entire paragraph about how beautiful they looked together. I stared at the photo for a long time. They looked happy. Genuinely happy. And some part of me, the part that wasn't hurt or resentful, was glad for that. Mandy deserved happiness. She wasn't a bad person. She was just thoughtless, the way people are when they've never had to consider scarcity or sacrifice. But I also knew I couldn't watch her get married. I couldn't sit in that beautiful venue that I'd paid for and smile through the ceremony and pretend that everything was fine. I couldn't listen to toasts about love and partnership and family while being introduced to distant relatives as the sister who never quite figured things out. I opened my email and found the confirmation for my Sedona rental. A small casita on the east side of town, tucked into the rocks, with a private patio and views of Thunder Mountain. The photos showed white stucco walls, exposed beams, a simple bedroom with a quilted bedspread. It looked quiet. It looked like exactly nowhere anyone in my family would ever think to look for me. 10 days. I had 10 days to get through. Work became my refuge. I threw myself into the final testing phase of the launch, staying late, volunteering for tasks nobody else wanted. My manager commented that I seemed especially focused, which was code for noticing I was at my desk long after everyone else had gone home. The family group chat continued its constant churn. Updates about the rehearsal dinner menu. Debate about whether the ceremony should start at 4 or 4:30. A minor crisis about someone's +1 needing to be accommodated at the last minute. Through it all I stayed silent, a ghost in the thread. On September 22nd, 3 days before my flight, Mom called. I was at home making dinner and I almost didn't answer. But old habits die hard. "Hi, honey," she said, her voice bright and busy. "Do you have a second?" "Sure. What's up?" "I just wanted to check in about the wedding. You're still coming, right?" The question caught me off guard. I'd assumed my attendance was such a given that it didn't require confirmation. "Why do you ask?" "Well, you've just been so quiet lately. And when you said you couldn't pick up Grandma, I don't know, I started worrying that maybe something was wrong." I stirred pasta that didn't need stirring, buying time. "I've just been busy with work." "I know, sweetheart, but this is your sister's wedding. It's important." "I know it's important. So you'll be there." It wasn't quite a question. I could hear the assumption in her voice, the certainty that of course I'd be there because I was always there. Reliable Tori. Steady Tori. Tori who never caused problems. I took a breath. Actually, I'm not going to make it. Silence. Complete and total silence. I could picture her face, frozen in confusion, trying to process words that didn't make sense. What do you mean you're not going to make it? I have something else that weekend. I won't be able to attend. Tori. Her voice had shifted, no longer bright, now edged with something between disbelief and panic. This is Mandy's wedding. I know. You can't just not come. You're her sister. Mom, What could possibly be more important than your sister's wedding? The question hung there. I could have explained. I could have listed every slight, every dismissal, every moment of being taken for granted. I could have told her about the $38,000, about being called the family embarrassment, about funding an entire wedding and not even getting a thank you, let alone a seat in the family photos that mattered. But I didn't, because explaining would require her to understand, and I was tired of hoping for understanding that never came. I just can't be there, I said quietly. I'm sorry. Tori, this is unacceptable. Mandy is going to be devastated. The whole family will be asking where you are. What am I supposed to tell people? Tell them I had something I couldn't get out of. This is so unlike you. Her voice was climbing now, stress turning to anger. You're being incredibly selfish. The word hit like a slap. Selfish. After everything I'd given, every way I'd bent myself into shapes that fit their needs, I was selfish for taking one weekend for myself. I have to go, I said. My dinner's burning. It wasn't, but she didn't argue. We're going to talk about this later, she said, and hung up. I set my phone on the counter and turned off the stove. I wasn't hungry anymore. I walked to my bedroom and pulled out my suitcase, the same one I'd use for the occasional work conference, and started packing. Hiking boots. Layers for cool desert mornings. A journal I bought months ago and never written in. My father's watch, which I sometimes wore when I needed to feel anchored. My phone started buzzing. Text messages rapid fire. First from Mom, then from Mandy. I didn't read them. I just watched the notifications pile up. A digital avalanche of demands for explanation and capitulation. Finally, I turned the phone face down and finished packing in silence. 3 days later, I was sitting in Denver International Airport, waiting for my flight to Phoenix with a connection to Flagstaff and then a rental car down to Sedona. It was early, barely 6 in the morning, and the terminal was quiet except for the ambient noise of CNN playing on overhead monitors and the occasional announcement about boarding gates. My phone had been on airplane mode since I'd left my apartment. I knew there were messages waiting. I knew there were probably voicemails. But I needed this buffer. This liminal space between the life I was stepping away from and whatever came next. I bought a coffee that was too expensive and sat near the window, watching planes taxi and take off. The sky was just beginning to lighten, deep blue fading to pink at the edges. In a few hours I'd be in Arizona. Red rocks. Silence. Space. The boarding call came. I gathered my things and got in line, feeling the weight of my phone in my pocket, still silent, still holding back the flood. As I handed my boarding pass to the gate agent and walked down the jetway, I felt something unexpected. Not guilt, not anxiety, just a quiet, tentative sense of relief. The plane touched down in Flagstaff just before noon. I'd slept through most of the flight, the kind of deep dreamless sleep that comes from complete exhaustion, and woke up to the pilot's voice announcing our descent. Outside the small oval window, the landscape had transformed from Colorado's green and gold into something stark and ancient. Red earth. Scrub brush. Rock formations that looked like they'd been there since the beginning of time. The Flagstaff airport was tiny, barely more than a single terminal, and I collected my rental car with the efficiency of someone who just wanted to keep moving. The woman at the counter asked if I was visiting for pleasure or business, and I said pleasure, even though I wasn't sure that was accurate. Escape didn't quite fall into either category. The drive from Flagstaff to Sedona took about 40 minutes, Highway 89A winding through Oak Creek Canyon, in a series of switchbacks that made my hands grip the steering wheel tighter than necessary. But the views were worth the anxiety. Towering red cliffs on either side, pine trees clinging to impossible angles, and glimpses of the creek below, water moving over smooth stones. I'd rolled the windows down and the air smelled different here. Drier. Cleaner. Like sun on rock and something almost sweet, maybe juniper or pinyon pine. The temperature was perfect, warm but not hot, the kind of late September weather that made you understand why people moved to the desert. By the time I reached Sedona proper, driving through the main strip with its art galleries and tourist shops and restaurants with names like Cowboy Club and Elote Cafe, I felt some of the tension in my shoulders begin to release. Nobody here knew me. Nobody here needed anything from me. I was just another tourist in hiking boots and sunglasses, anonymous and unimportant. The casita I'd rented was on the east side of town, tucked into a residential area that felt removed from the commercial energy of the main drag. I followed the GPS down a winding road lined with desert landscaping, agave and prickly pear and rocks arranged in careful patterns, until I found the address. The property was exactly like the photos. Small. Simple. White stucco with a red tile roof, and a wooden gate that opened onto a private courtyard. The owner had left the key in a lockbox by the door along with a handwritten note welcoming me, and listing the Wi-Fi password and some local recommendations. I let myself in and stood in the doorway for a moment, taking it in. Terracotta tile floors. White walls with exposed dark beams across the ceiling. A small kitchen with turquoise accents. A living area with a leather couch and a fireplace I probably wouldn't need. Through the sliding glass door at the back, a patio with 2 chairs and an unobstructed view of red rocks rising against a painfully blue sky. I dropped my suitcase in the bedroom and walked directly to the patio. The silence was profound. No traffic noise. No voices. Just wind and the occasional bird call and the vast quiet of open space. I sat down in one of the chairs and pulled out my phone, my finger hovering over the button that would take it off airplane mode. I didn't press it. Not yet. Instead, I just sat there, letting the desert settle around me, feeling the sun warm my face and arms. Somewhere back in Colorado, my family was probably in full wedding preparation mode. Final fittings and rehearsal arrangements and last-minute panics about weather and timelines. They were probably also talking about me, wondering where I was, whether I'd actually meant it when I said I wasn't coming. Let them wonder. For the first time in as long as I could remember, their uncertainty wasn't my problem to solve. I spent the rest of that first day doing essentially nothing. I unpacked my suitcase, hanging clothes in the small closet and lining up my toiletries in the bathroom. I made a sandwich from supplies I'd picked up at a grocery store on the way into town. I sat on the patio and read the first 50 pages of a novel I'd been meaning to start for months. As the sun began to set, painting the rocks in shades of orange and pink and purple that seemed almost artificially vivid, I finally turned my phone back on. The messages flooded in immediately. 37 text messages. 14 missed calls. 6 voicemails. I watched the notifications populate my lock screen like some kind of digital assault, and then I turned the phone face down on the patio table without reading any of them. Instead, I opened my camera and took a photo of the sunset. Nothing artistic, just a simple shot of the view from where I was sitting, the rocks glowing in the late light, shadows deep and long. I posted it to my Instagram story without a caption, without a location tag, just the image standing alone. Then I set my phone to do not disturb and went inside to make tea. The next morning I woke up early, before dawn, pulled from sleep by the unfamiliar silence and the quality of darkness that felt different from the city. I made coffee in the casita's small French press and took it outside, wrapping myself in a blanket against the desert morning chill. The sky was just beginning to lighten, stars still visible overhead but fading as the eastern horizon turned from black to deep blue to pale gold. I sat there and watched the sun rise over the rocks. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was gradual, patient, the light creeping across the landscape in increments, bringing color back to a world that had gone monochrome in the night. By the time the sun fully cleared the horizon, the rocks were glowing red-orange, and I understood why people called this place spiritual. There was something about the scale of it, the age of it, that put human concerns into perspective. My phone buzzed inside. I ignored it. Instead, I got dressed in hiking clothes and consulted the list the owner had left. Cathedral Rock Trail was nearby, and supposed to offer good views without being too strenuous. That seemed manageable for someone who'd spent the last 6 months sitting at a desk. The trailhead parking lot was already half full when I arrived at 7:30. Other early risers with the same idea. I locked my car and joined the flow of people heading toward the trail, following signs and cairns up a path that started gentle but quickly became steep. The rock face of Cathedral Rock loomed above, a series of red spires reaching toward the sky. The climb was harder than I'd expected. Not technically difficult, but steep enough that I had to use my hands in places, scrambling over smooth red stone worn slick by thousands of other hikers. My thighs burned. My breath came hard. But there was something satisfying about it, something clean about physical exertion that had nothing to do with emotional labor. I reached a saddle between two of the rock spires and stopped, not quite at the summit but high enough for the view to open up completely. Sedona spread out below, the town looking small and contained against the vastness of the landscape. Red rocks in every direction, layers of geological time visible in the striations. The sky impossibly clear and blue. I sat down on a flat section of rock and drank water from the bottle I'd brought, letting my heart rate slow. A couple in their 60s climbed past me, offering friendly nods. A younger woman with a yoga mat strapped to her backpack settled nearby and pulled out her phone to take photos. Normal people doing normal things, none of them carrying the weight of family obligation or unanswered messages or weddings they'd paid for but wouldn't attend. I pulled out my own phone. The Do Not Disturb mode showed 42 notifications waiting. I looked at the number for a moment, then opened my camera instead and took a photo looking down at the town below, my hiking boots visible at the bottom of the frame to show the height. I posted it to my story with no caption, just the image, then put my phone away and sat for another 20 minutes, letting the quiet sink in. The hike down was easier but required concentration. The smooth rock was slippery and unforgiving, and more than once I had to sit down and scoot to a lower level rather than risk a fall. By the time I reached the parking lot, my legs were shaking and I was covered in red dust, but I felt more present in my body than I had in months. I drove back to the casita and showered, letting the hot water run over sore muscles, watching red dust swirl down the drain. Then I made lunch, scrambled eggs and toast, and ate it on the patio while reading more of my novel. The day stretched out with no particular shape or urgency. No deadlines. No requests. Just hours that belonged only to me. That afternoon I drove into town and wandered through art galleries, looking at paintings and sculptures and photographs that other people had made. I stopped at a shop that sold crystals and incense and other vaguely mystical objects, and even though I didn't believe in energy vortexes or chakras or any of it, I bought a small piece of rose quartz because it was pretty and pink and fit in my palm. At a coffee shop called Chocolaterie, I ordered something called a lavender latte and sat outside in the shade, watching tourists walk by with shopping bags and hiking gear. A family with 3 young kids struggled to keep everyone together and moving in the same direction. An elderly couple held hands as they examined a restaurant menu posted in a window. Life happening in its ordinary, unspectacular way. I finally opened my messages. It felt like ripping off a bandage, something that needed to be done but would hurt regardless of how quickly or slowly I did it. The texts from my mother ranged from confused to angry to worried. The first few were variations on, "Where are you?" and "Please call me." Then they shifted to, "This is very hurtful to your sister," and "I don't understand why you're doing this." The most recent one, sent this morning, said simply, "Tori, please. Just let us know you're safe." Mandy's messages followed a similar trajectory, confusion giving way to hurt. "I don't know what I did wrong. Mom says you're not coming and I don't understand. Did I do something? Are you mad at me?" Then this morning, "I'm trying not to be upset, but this really feels like you don't care about me at all." There were messages from Brittany too, surprisingly. "Hey, heard you're not coming to the wedding? Everything okay?" And then later, "Aunt Linda is really stressed about this, just FYI." Even Harper had texted, "Your mom called me asking if I knew where you were. I said I didn't. Do I know where you are? Are you okay?" I stared at the screen for a long time. My first instinct was to apologize, to explain, to smooth everything over the way I always did, to make their discomfort my responsibility. But sitting there in the Sedona sunshine with my overpriced lavender latte, and my sore legs from hiking and my face probably slightly sunburned, I couldn't find the energy to perform that role anymore. I typed out a message to my mother. "I'm safe. I'm sorry I didn't tell you I was leaving, but I needed some time away. I'll be out of touch for a bit. I hope the wedding is beautiful." To Mandy I wrote something similar. "I'm okay. I'm sorry I can't be there. I hope you have the most wonderful day. You deserve all the happiness. To Harper, I was more honest. I'm in Arizona. Needed to get away from wedding stuff. I'm fine, just needed space. We'll explain later. I hit send on all three before I could second-guess myself, then immediately turned off my phone again. I wasn't ready for the responses. I wasn't ready to be pulled back into the vortex of their needs and expectations. Instead, I finished my latte and walked to a bookstore I'd spotted earlier. A small independent place with a porch full of plants and a cat sleeping in the window. Inside, it smelled like old paper and sage. I browsed without purpose, running my fingers along spines, reading random paragraphs from random books. Eventually, I bought a thin volume of Mary Oliver poems that fell open to a page that said, "You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting." I sat on a bench outside the bookstore and read that poem 3 times. Then I read it a 4th time slower, letting each word settle. The wedding was tomorrow, September 28th. Right now, back in Colorado, they were probably doing the rehearsal. Walking through ceremony blocking. Figuring out who stood where. Mandy trying on her dress one last time. Eric making awkward small talk with relatives he just met. The bridesmaids getting their nails done or having a final girls' night or whatever people did the evening before weddings. And I was here, 3 states away, reading poetry on a bench in Sedona while the sun moved lower in the sky and lengthened the shadows. I should have felt guilty. Some part of me expected crushing guilt, the kind that would send me scrambling to book an emergency flight back, to show up disheveled and apologetic but present. But I didn't feel that. I felt something closer to grief, maybe. Grief for the relationship I thought I had with my sister, with my family. Grief for the role I'd played for so long that no longer fit. But not guilt. That evening I cooked a real dinner in the Casita's kitchen. Nothing fancy, just pasta with olive oil and vegetables I picked up at the grocery store. But it felt grounding to chop and stir and season. I ate on the patio as the light faded, watching the rocks turn from red to purple to black as night fell. The stars here were remarkable, undimmed by city lights, scattered across the sky in dense clusters. I thought about calling Harper back. Thought about turning on my phone and dealing with whatever new messages had accumulated. But I didn't. Tomorrow was the wedding. Tomorrow they'd all be focused on Mandy and Eric and the ceremony and reception. Tomorrow I could be invisible in a way that was intentional rather than imposed. I wrapped myself in a blanket and lay on one of the patio loungers, staring up at the stars. A satellite drifted across my field of vision, a tiny moving point of light in the vast stillness. I tried to locate constellations but couldn't remember which patterns were which. It didn't matter. The not knowing was okay. Somewhere around 10 I went inside and got ready for bed. I set my phone on the nightstand without turning it on and climbed under the covers. Through the bedroom window I could see a slice of night sky, stars bright against the darkness. I fell asleep trying to count them, losing track somewhere past 30, drifting into a sleep deeper and more dreamless than any I'd had in months. The next morning, the day of the wedding, I woke to my alarm at 6:30. For a moment I was disoriented, not sure where I was or why everything looked unfamiliar. Then it came back. Sedona. The Casita. The wedding I wasn't attending. I made coffee and took it outside. The morning was cool and still, the rocks just beginning to catch the first light. Today at 4:30 Mountain Time, my sister would marry Eric at the Broadmoor in a ceremony overlooking Cheyenne Mountain. There would be flowers, probably those garden roses she'd been debating. There would be music, a string quartet she'd mentioned in the group chat. There would be 200 guests, family and friends, all dressed up and smiling for photos. And I would be here. Hiking probably. Or sitting on this patio. Or wandering through town looking at art I couldn't afford. Anywhere but there. I thought about what I'd wear if I were attending. Probably the navy dress I'd bought 3 months ago specifically for this occasion. Currently hanging in my closet in Denver. Simple, appropriate, forgettable. The kind of dress that wouldn't draw attention or compete with the bridal party. I'd probably pair it with the silver earrings my father had given me for college graduation, the ones I wore when I needed to feel like he was with me. But I wasn't there. I was here in hiking pants and a thermal shirt, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise alone. I decided to hike Bell Rock, another iconic Sedona formation that was supposed to be accessible, but still offered good views. The trail was moderate, spiraling around and over the bell-shaped rock, with plenty of places to stop and rest and take in the landscape. I started early, beating most of the crowds, and found a rhythm in the climb. As I hiked, I kept checking the time on my watch. 8 in the morning here, 9 in Colorado. The bridal party would be gathering. Hair and makeup starting. Mimosas and nervous energy and last-minute adjustments. By noon, they'd probably be at the venue. By 3, getting dressed. By 4, the ceremony would begin. I reached a plateau on Bell Rock around 11, 2 hours before the wedding would start. I sat on the red stone and ate the trail mix I'd brought, looking out at the other formations visible from here. Courthouse Butte. Cathedral Rock in the distance. Layers of red and orange and cream-colored stone. Ancient seabeds pushed up and eroded into these impossible shapes. My phone was in my backpack, turned off. I pulled it out and held it for a moment, feeling its weight. Then I turned it on. The messages were overwhelming. Not just from family now, but from extended relatives who'd apparently heard I wasn't coming. Aunt Peggy had sent a long text about how disappointed she was in my behavior, and how this was typical of my inability to prioritize family. Uncle Richard had sent a terse, "This is unacceptable." Brittany's messages had turned from concerned to judgmental. "I don't know what your problem is, but today is supposed to be about Mandy." My mother's most recent text, sent an hour ago, said, "She keeps asking where you are. I don't know what to tell her. Please reconsider." It's not too late. But it was too late. Even if I wanted to, even if I booked a flight right this second, I couldn't get from Sedona to Colorado Springs in time for a 4:30 ceremony. The geography made the decision final. I scrolled past all the messages of disappointment and anger and found the one from Harper. "I told your mom I think you're doing what you need to do. I don't know the whole story, but I trust you. Call me when you're ready." I typed back quickly. "Thank you. That means more than you know. I'm okay. I promise." Then I opened my camera and took a photo looking down at the view from Bell Rock. My hiking boots visible at the edge of the frame, red rocks and blue sky stretching out to the horizon. I posted it to my Instagram story. No caption. No location tag. Just the image. A statement of presence in my absence. I watched it post, watched the view count tick up almost immediately. I knew my family would see it. I knew they'd know exactly what it meant. That while they were at a wedding I'd paid for, I was here choosing myself for once. I turned the phone off again and put it away. Then I lay back on the warm red stone and closed my eyes, feeling the sun on my face, listening to the wind, letting the wedding happen without me. I stayed on Bell Rock until early afternoon, long past when most hikers had descended for lunch or to escape the midday heat. The stone beneath me had grown warm, almost hot, radiating back the sun it had absorbed all morning. I'd moved into a sliver of shade cast by a higher outcropping and just sat there, watching light shift across the landscape, marking time in a way that had nothing to do with ceremony schedules or reception timelines. Around 2 o'clock, I finally climbed down, taking my time on the descent, making sure of each foothold. The parking lot was full now, tour buses and rental cars packed tight, families unloading gear and slathering on sunscreen. I drove back to the casita with the windows down, letting the wind tangle my hair, not caring that I probably looked like I'd been dragged through the desert. Back at the casita, I showered again, washing away red dust and dried sweat, then stood in front of the bathroom mirror in a towel, just looking at myself. My face was sunburned across the nose and cheeks. My hair was a mess. I had a small scrape on my elbow from where I'd caught myself on the rocks. I looked tired and wind-worn and more alive than I had in months. The wedding would be starting in about an hour. I tried to picture it. Guests arriving at the Broadmoor, parking valets directing traffic, people informal were navigating the grounds. The garden ceremony space with its view of the mountain, chairs arranged in neat rows, probably white covers with sage green sashes to match Mandy's color scheme. The string quartet warming up. Eric and his groomsmen gathered somewhere out of sight, nervous and trying not to show it. And Mandy in her dress. I'd seen photos of it. One of the few planning details she'd voluntarily shared with me. It was beautiful, simple and elegant with a fitted bodice and flowing skirt, the kind of dress that would photograph well from every angle. She'd look stunning. She always did. I wondered if anyone had taken the seat that would have been mine, or if they just adjusted the layout, closed the gap so seamlessly that my absence became invisible. That seemed more likely. Easier to rearrange than to explain. I made myself a sandwich and ate it without tasting it, then tried to read but couldn't focus. The words blurred together, meaningless. I kept checking my watch. 3:45. They'd be lining up now. Bridesmaids getting their bouquets, checking their makeup one last time. The mothers being escorted to their seats. Background music shifting to something ceremonial. For 15. Everyone seated. The officiant in place. Eric at the altar, hands clasped, trying to look calm. 4:30. The music would change. Everyone would stand. Mandy would appear at the back of the aisle on our Uncle Richard's arm. Since our father wasn't here to walk her down, she'd pause for effect, letting everyone take in the moment, then begin that slow measured walk toward her future. I sat on the patio with my phone in my hands turned off, a dead black rectangle of metal and glass. I could turn it on. I could watch the whole thing unfold in real time through other people's posts and stories. I could torture myself with images of what I was missing, evidence of my exclusion made permanent and public. Or I could not. I could let it happen somewhere else to people who felt increasingly like strangers, while I sat here in the desert and breathed and existed in my own space. I set the phone on the table face down and went inside. In my suitcase I found the journal I'd brought, the one I'd never written in, and carried it back outside with a pen. I sat down and opened to the first blank page, staring at it for a long moment before I started writing. I didn't write about the wedding. I didn't write about my family or my sister or any of the hurt and resentment that had brought me here. Instead, I wrote about the rocks. About the way the morning light had looked on Cathedral Rock. About the sound of wind through juniper trees. About the elderly couple I'd seen holding hands outside the restaurant. About the simple pleasure of scrambled eggs eaten on a patio with no one needing anything from me. I wrote for almost an hour, filling pages with observations and thoughts that had nothing to do with obligations or expectations. When I finally stopped, my hand was cramping and the sun had moved enough that I was sitting in full shade. I looked at what I'd written, all these words that were just for me, and felt something settle in my chest. By 6 o'clock, the ceremony would be over. They'd be taking photos now, the golden hour light making everything look magical and intentional. Bride and groom, wedding party, family groupings, all the combinations that proved everyone who mattered had been there. In a few hours, those photos would start appearing online, perfect and polished, telling the story they wanted told. I made dinner, a simple stir-fry with vegetables and rice, and ate it slowly while the sky began its evening transition. The light here was different every moment, constantly shifting, painting the rocks in shades that seemed almost unreal. I took my plate outside and watched the colors deepen, orange to pink to purple to that particular blue that comes just after sunset. My phone stayed off. The wedding reception was probably starting now. Cocktail hour in some elegant room, past appetizers and an open bar. Then dinner, toasts, the first dance. All the ritualized moments that made a wedding a wedding. Aunt Peggy would give a speech, probably something sentimental and pointed about family and commitment. Eric's best man would tell embarrassing stories that walked the line of appropriateness. My mother would cry, mascara running despite her best efforts. And Mandy would be radiant, exactly as she should be. This was her day. She deserved to have it be perfect. My absence didn't change that. If anything, my presence might have complicated it, brought an undercurrent of tension that everyone would have felt but no one would have named. As full dark settled in, I finally turned on my phone. The notifications were catastrophic. Over 100 messages. 23 missed calls. Voicemails I knew I wouldn't listen to, but I didn't open any of it. Instead, I went straight to Instagram and looked at the tag posts and stories. There it was. The wedding in digital form. Photos of the ceremony space, flowers arranged in cascading sprays. Mandy and Eric at the altar, both in profile, holding hands. The kiss, captured from multiple angles by multiple guests. Reception shots, the venue transformed with lighting and linens and centerpieces that must have cost a fortune. My fortune technically, though no one looking at these images would know that. I scrolled through them with a strange detachment. It all looked beautiful. Professional. Exactly the wedding Mandy had wanted. I recognized faces, family and friends, everyone dressed up and smiling. In one photo I could see my mother in the background, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. In another, Aunt Peggy was holding court at a table, surrounded by relatives hanging on her words. No one looked upset. No one looked like they were missing anything. The wedding had happened without me, and the world had kept turning. I was about to close the app when I saw a new post from Gabrielle Martinez, the wedding planner. It was a photo of Mandy and Eric cutting the cake, both of them laughing at something off camera. The caption was standard wedding planner marketing. Something about love and celebration and honored to be part of their special day. But there was a comment from Mandy underneath it, posted just minutes ago. Gabrielle, you made everything so perfect. I can't thank you enough. And I need to publicly thank my sister Tori, who made all of this possible. Tori, I know you're not here and I don't fully understand why, but I want you to know that none of this would have happened without you. You funded this entire wedding when we couldn't, and I never properly thanked you. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for a lot of things. I hope we can talk soon. I love you. I read it 3 times. Then I read it a 4th time slower, making sure I hadn't misunderstood. She thanked me. Publicly. At her wedding. In front of everyone. The comments under her post were already multiplying. Heart emojis and congratulations and variations on so sweet. From people who had no context. But there were others too. From family members. Aunt Peggy had written, I didn't know that, followed by 3 periods that somehow conveyed an entire recalibration of assumptions. My mother had commented Tori has always been so generous, which felt both true and completely insufficient. Brittany had written, wait, seriously? Derek had left a surprised emoji. Other relatives were chiming in with variations of shock and newly minted appreciation. The family embarrassment had suddenly become the family benefactor, and I could practically feel the cognitive dissonance radiating through the comment section. I set the phone down and stared at the dark shapes of the rocks against the slightly less dark sky. She'd thanked me. After everything, after the silence and the exclusion and the casual dismissal of my feelings, Mandy had stood up at her wedding reception and publicly acknowledged what I'd done. It didn't erase anything. It didn't undo the months of being taken for granted or the casual cruelty of being called the family embarrassment. But it was something. An acknowledgement. A crack in the facade that they'd all constructed where I was simultaneously essential and invisible. My phone started ringing. My mother's name on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately. This time Mandy. Then Harper. Then a number I didn't recognize. Probably some relative calling to offer belated appreciation or ask uncomfortable questions. I turned the phone to silent and set it face down on the table. Then I went inside and made tea, chamomile from a box I'd found in the casitas cabinet, and brought it back outside. The night was cool now, desert temperatures dropping fast once the sun disappeared. I wrapped myself in a blanket and sat in the darkness, sipping tea that burned my tongue slightly, listening to the immense quiet. The next morning I woke before dawn again, some internal clock having adjusted to this rhythm of early rising and watching the sun bring the rocks back to life. I made coffee and sat on the patio wrapped in layers against the chill, waiting for light. My phone was still where I'd left it, face down and silent. I knew there would be more messages, more calls, more demands for response and explanation. But I wasn't ready yet. I needed this space to last a little longer. As the sun rose, I thought about what came next. I had the casita for 3 more days. Then I'd fly back to Denver and return to my apartment and my job and my life. The wedding would be over. Mandy and Eric would leave for their honeymoon, somewhere tropical from what I'd overheard in planning discussions. The family would disperse back to their regular routines, and I'd have to figure out what my relationship with all of them looked like now. Whether Mandy's public thank you was the beginning of actual change, or just a momentary acknowledgement that would fade back into the old patterns. Whether my mother would understand why I'd left or would just see it as another thing to be managed and smoothed over. Whether Aunt Peggy would revise her opinion of me, or would find new ways to be dismissive. I couldn't control any of that. I could only control my own boundaries, my own willingness to keep playing roles that hurt me. Around 8, I finally picked up my phone and turned it back on. The messages were exactly what I'd expected. Shock and apology and confusion all tangled together. My mother had left 4 voicemails, each one more emotional than the last. Mandy had sent a long text message that I could see started with Tori, I'm so sorry, but I didn't open it to read the rest. There were also messages from relatives I barely spoke to, suddenly interested in my life and decisions. Brittany had texted, "I had no idea you paid for everything. That's actually really amazing." Derek had sent, "Props to you, seriously." Even Uncle Richard, king of the terse communication, had written, "You're a good sister." I scrolled through them all without responding to any. Then I opened the thread with Harper and read her messages. There were several, spanning from last night through this morning. The most recent one said, "I saw Mandy's post. Holy shit, Tori. We need to talk when you're ready. No pressure, just want to make sure you're processing all this okay." I typed back, "I'm okay. Still in Sedona. Processing. We'll call you soon." Her response came within seconds. "Take your time. Proud of you for setting boundaries. That couldn't have been easy." It hadn't been. It still wasn't. But sitting here in the morning light with the rocks glowing red gold in the distance, I felt more like myself than I had in years. Not the version of myself that existed to serve other people's needs. Just myself, unadorned and uncomplicated. I spent that day hiking again, this time a longer trail out to Devil's Bridge, one of Sedona's most photographed spots. The hike was moderate but long, winding through scrub brush and over red rock, eventually leading to a natural stone arch that bridged a gap between two formations. Standing on the bridge, looking down at the drop below and out at the endless landscape of red rock and blue sky, I felt the scale of things shift again. My family drama, the wedding, the hurt feelings and complicated dynamics, all of it was real and valid and deserved to be acknowledged. But it was also small in the context of geological time, in the context of these rocks that had been here for millions of years and would be here long after everyone I knew was gone. That perspective didn't make the pain less real, but it made it more bearable somehow, contained it in a way that let me see around its edges. I took a photo standing on Devil's Bridge, my arms spread for balance, the vast emptiness of space behind me. It was touristy and cliché and I didn't care. I posted it to my story with a caption for the first time since I'd arrived. "Finding my balance." The responses came quickly. Harper sent back a heart. A few coworkers from the office commented with encouraging emojis. And then, surprisingly, Mandy, "I'm glad you're taking care of yourself. I mean that. We need to talk when you're ready. No pressure." I looked at her message for a long time before responding. "We do. Soon. Thank you for what you said last night." I should have said it months ago. I should have said a lot of things. That was all we exchanged, but it felt like something. Not resolution, but the possibility of it. A door opening where before there had only been wall. I spent my last 2 days in Sedona in a kind of peaceful limbo. I hiked more shorter trails that didn't require as much exertion. I sat in coffee shops and read and wrote in my journal. I drove the scenic routes with no destination in mind, just following roads that looked interesting, pulling over at overlooks to take photos I'd probably never look at again but that felt important to capture in the moment. I started responding to messages selectively. To my mother, I sent a short text saying we'd talk when I got home but that I was fine and needed this time. To Aunt Peggy's demanding message about explanations and family responsibility, I sent nothing. Some bridges were worth burning, or at least worth letting weather naturally into collapse. On my last evening, I sat on the casita patio and watched the sunset one more time. The rocks cycled through their now familiar progression of colors, the light show I'd witnessed every evening I'd been here. Tomorrow I'd pack up and drive back to Flagstaff and fly home to Denver and resume my regular life. But something had shifted. Some fundamental recalibration of who I was willing to be and what I was willing to accept. I'd left Colorado as the family embarrassment, the awkward sister who never quite fit. I was returning as someone who'd chosen herself, who'd set a boundary and held it even when it was uncomfortable, who'd proven that the world didn't end when she said no. My phone buzzed. A text from Mandy. "Can we video chat? I know you're still in Arizona, but I really want to talk to you before you come home." I looked at the message, then at the sunset, then back at the message. I wasn't ready for a full reckoning yet. But maybe I was ready for a beginning. "Give me 20 minutes, I typed back. I went inside and washed my face, put on a clean shirt, poured myself a glass of water. Then I settled on the couch and opened FaceTime, calling her back. She answered immediately. She was in what looked like a hotel room, her hair down and makeup mostly removed, wearing a soft-looking sweater. She looked tired but also more present than I'd seen her in months. Hi, she said, and her voice cracked slightly. Hi. Thank you for calling. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure either. We looked at each other through the screens, separated by hundreds of miles and years of accumulated hurt. She took a breath. I'm sorry, she said. I'm so sorry, Tori. For all of it. For taking you for granted and not appreciating what you did, and not inviting you properly to the wedding, and just assuming you'd always be there no matter how I treated you. I'm sorry it took you leaving for me to see how badly I'd messed up. I felt tears prick my eyes but kept my voice steady. Why did it take me leaving? I don't know. I think I just got so used to you being the reliable one, the one who handled things, that I stopped seeing you as a person with your own feelings and needs. You became like infrastructure. Essential but invisible. That's exactly what it felt like. I know. God, Tori, I know, and I'm so ashamed of it. When Mom told me you weren't coming to the wedding, I was angry at first. Like, how dare you miss my big day? And then I was hurt. And then I started actually thinking about everything you'd done for me, not just the money but all of it, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd asked how you were doing without it being just a formality before I launched into my own stuff. February, I said quietly. You called me in February when you were worried about your performance review at work. You asked how I was doing and actually waited for an answer. That was the last time. She closed her eyes. That's 7 months ago. Yes. And in those 7 months, how many times did I ask you for something? I didn't want to answer that, but she deserved the truth. A lot. The wedding money was $35,000. I know that because I finally looked at the paperwork. That's more than half of most people's annual salary, and I just took it and said thank you with emojis and then never mentioned it again. You said you'd pay me back. I did say that. And I meant it at the time. But then I just let it slide out of my mind because it was easier not to think about it. That's not okay. None of this is okay. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. No, it's not. When I was getting ready yesterday, putting on my dress and doing all the wedding day things, I kept thinking about how you should be there. Not because I needed you to do anything, but because you're my sister and I love you and you'd paid for the whole thing. And I realized that I'd never even properly invited you. I just assumed. And then when you weren't there, I felt this huge absence. Like the whole day was hollow somehow, even though it was beautiful and everyone was celebrating. It looked beautiful. From the photos. It was. It was everything I wanted. Except you weren't there, and that made it incomplete. So during the reception, I just decided to say it out loud. To publicly acknowledge what you'd done because you deserved that at minimum. And the look on everyone's faces, Tori. Aunt Peggy almost choked on her wine. Mom started crying harder. People were so shocked that you'd done this massive thing and none of them knew. Brittany called me the family embarrassment at Aunt Peggy's barbecue. Mandy's face crumpled. What? Labor Day weekend. I overheard her telling someone that I was awkward and didn't fit in and that Aunt Peggy said I'd been the family embarrassment since high school. Oh my God, Tori. That's when I decided I wasn't coming. Not just because of what she said, but because nobody disagreed. It was just accepted as fact. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know she'd said that. Would it have mattered if you did? She was quiet for a moment. I want to say yes. But honestly, a few months ago I might have just let it go. I might have thought you were overreacting or being too sensitive. I wasn't a good enough sister to defend you the way I should have. No, you weren't. I want to be better. I want to actually be your sister, not just someone who takes from you. That's going to require actual change, Mandy. Not just words. I know. I'm willing to do the work. Therapy, maybe. Actually showing up for you. Paying you back, which is going to take time, but I'm committed to it. Whatever it takes. I looked at her through the screen, trying to assess if this was real or just the emotion of the moment. I need you to understand that I'm not going to be the person who fixes everything anymore. I can't be your safety net for every crisis or your ATM when you run short. I love you, but I have to protect myself too. I understand. I do. And I'm not going to ask you to be that person anymore. I need to figure out how to handle my own stuff. We talked for another hour. About specifics, about patterns, about the family dynamics that had created this situation. About our father and how his death had forced me into a caretaker role I'd never chosen. About Mom's tendency to rely on me as the stable one. about how family events had become performances where I was always backstage crew and never in the spotlight. It wasn't comfortable. There were moments of tension and disagreement. But it felt real in a way our conversations hadn't in years. When we finally hung up, I sat in the quiet of the casita feeling drained but also lighter somehow. We hadn't fixed everything. One conversation couldn't undo years of dysfunction. But it was a start. A genuine start. The next morning I packed up my things, stripped the bed and left the casita as clean as I'd found it. I locked the door and left the key in the lockbox, then stood in the courtyard for a moment looking at the space that had been my refuge. The rocks beyond were glowing in the morning light, as reliable and ancient as ever. I drove to Flagstaff slowly, savoring the final views of the red rocks through my rearview mirror. The flight home was uneventful. I slept through most of it, the exhaustion of the last week finally catching up with me. Landing in Denver felt surreal. The city looked exactly the same as when I'd left it, which seemed impossible given how much had shifted inside me. I collected my car from long-term parking and drove home through familiar streets, everything ordinary and unchanged. My apartment was exactly as I'd left it. Keys in the bowl by the door. Plants slightly droopy but alive. Mail piled up on the counter where my neighbor had left it. I dropped my suitcase by the bedroom door and walked to the window, looking out at the Denver skyline, the mountains visible in the distance. My phone buzzed. A text from Harper. Back in town? Coffee tomorrow? Yes and yes, I typed back. Another text, this one from my mother. Let me know when you're ready to talk. I love you. I sat with that one for a while before responding. I will. Love you too. The weeks that followed were complicated. There were conversations, some difficult, some surprisingly productive. My mother cried and apologized and admitted she'd relied on me too heavily after Dad died. We talked about patterns and expectations and how we could rebuild something healthier. Aunt Peggy sent a stiff email that was probably the closest she could come to an apology, acknowledging that she'd perhaps been too quick to judge, and that she recognized my contributions to the family. It wasn't much, but it was something. Mandy set up a payment plan to start paying me back. It would take years at the rate she could afford, but the gesture mattered more than the money at this point. We started having regular video calls where we actually talked about our lives, both of us making an effort to listen and be present. And me? I stayed in Denver but started living differently. I took a pottery class I'd been putting off for years. I went on actual dates with people from apps, some of them terrible but some surprisingly nice. I took a weekend trip to Moab just because I felt like it, no big reason or occasion required. I learned to say no without extensive justification, to set boundaries without apologizing for them, to take up space in my own life rather than existing in the margins of everyone else's. 6 months after the wedding, Mandy sent me a photo. It was from the reception, one I hadn't seen before. In it, my seat at the family table was empty. A single flower arrangement in front of it and a place card with my name. She'd left my seat there, visible and unfilled, a silent acknowledgement of absence. I know this doesn't change anything, her message said, but I wanted you to know that we felt you missing, that there was a space for you even though you couldn't fill it. And I'm working every day to make sure that next time, if there is a next time, you'll feel welcome enough to actually want to be there. I looked at that photo for a long time. At the empty chair that represented so much, absence and presence both. Then I saved it to my phone and wrote back. Thank you for showing me this. And thank you for trying. That matters more than you know. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. We weren't magically fixed. But we were trying, all of us in our imperfect ways, to be better to each other. To see each other. To make room. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes the empty chair becomes an invitation to build something new. Something more honest. Something where everyone has a seat and everyone is seen. I still have the piece of rose quartz I bought in Sedona. It sits on my desk at work. Smooth and pink and pretty for no reason except that I wanted it. Every time I look at it, I remember red rocks and silence and the moment I chose myself. That's the story. Not of a dramatic confrontation or a perfect reconciliation, but of boundaries set in space claimed and the slow work of rebuilding what matters. Of learning that being the family embarrassment was never about my worth. It was about their unwillingness to see me. And now I see myself. And that makes all the difference. The first family gathering after everything happened was Thanksgiving. 2 months after the wedding. My mother called in mid-October to extend the invitation, her voice careful and measured, like she was approaching a skittish animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. "I know this year has been complicated," she said, choosing her words with visible effort. "But I'm hoping we can all be together for the holiday. It wouldn't feel right without you there." I'd been expecting this call. Thanksgiving had always been at Mom's house, a tradition that stretched back to before Dad died. The whole family would gather, sometimes 20 people crammed into her dining room and spilling into the living room with plates balanced on laps. Aunt Peggy would bring her famous sweet potato casserole that nobody actually liked but everyone complimented. Uncle Richard would fall asleep on the couch by 3 in the afternoon. The kids would play in the basement while the adults talked over wine and coffee. It had been years since I'd enjoyed Thanksgiving, if I was honest with myself. It had become another obligation, another performance where I helped cook and clean and manage logistics while being largely invisible in the actual celebration. But this year felt different. This year they were asking, not assuming. "Can I think about it?" I said. There was a pause. In the old dynamic, this would have been where she'd push, where she'd deploy guilt or obligation or family duty to secure my compliance. But she didn't. "Of course," she said instead. "Just let me know by the end of the month so I can plan accordingly." I told her I would and we hung up. Then I sat with the question for 2 weeks, really sat with it, examining how it felt in my body when I imagined saying yes versus saying no. Yes felt tense, armored, like preparing for battle. No felt safer but also hollow, like I'd be protecting myself at the cost of connection I might actually want. Finally, I called Mandy. "Are you going to Thanksgiving?" I asked without preamble. "Yeah, we are. Eric's family is doing their thing on Friday, so we're doing Mom's on Thursday. Are you thinking about coming?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to. Part of me wants to stay as far away as possible." "That's fair. What would make it feel okay for you to come?" I appreciated that she asked instead of just trying to convince me. "Honestly, I need to know I won't be expected to run everything. I need to show up as a guest, not as staff." "I'll make sure of it. Seriously, I'll talk to Mom. You shouldn't have to coordinate and cook and clean. You should just get to be there. And I need to know that if it gets weird or uncomfortable, I can leave without it becoming a whole thing." "Absolutely. You can leave whenever you want. No guilt, no drama. I promise." There was something in her voice that made me believe her. Not just words, but genuine intention backed by the work she'd been doing. We'd had several more conversations since that first one after the wedding, and each time she'd shown up more present, more accountable. She'd started therapy, she told me, specifically to work on her tendency to take people for granted. It was early, but it was something. "Okay," I said. "I'll come. But I'm serious about the boundaries." "I know you are. And I'm serious about respecting them." I called my mother that evening and told her I'd be there. She cried, which I'd expected, but they were quiet tears, not the manipulative kind designed to make me feel guilty for ever having been gone. "I'm so glad," she said when she could speak again. "I've missed you. The house has felt wrong without you." "I've missed you too, Mom. But things are going to be different this year." "I know. And that's okay. Different might be better." Thanksgiving morning arrived cold and bright. I woke up in my own apartment and made myself breakfast, taking my time, not rushing. I told Mom I'd arrive around noon, after the initial cooking chaos but before the main meal. Late enough that I wouldn't get conscripted into labor, early enough to actually visit. I dressed carefully, not formally but intentionally. Dark jeans and a rust-colored sweater that I bought for myself last month. Soft cashmere that felt like a small luxury. My father's watch on my wrist. The silver earrings he'd given me. Armor made of memory and self-possession. The drive to my mother's house took 20 minutes. Streets quiet because everyone was already where they were going. I parked on the street and sat in my car for a moment, gathering myself. Through the window I could see the house, warm light glowing from inside. The oak tree in the front yard nearly bare now, branches stark against the blue sky. I could do this. I could walk in there and be myself and hold my boundaries and survive whatever happened. I'd survived worse. I grabbed the wine I'd brought, 2 nice bottles that had cost more than I usually spent, and walked up to the door. Before I could knock, it opened. Mandy stood there in an apron, flower on her cheek, smiling. "You came," she said, and pulled me into a hug that felt real. I said I would. I know, but I wasn't sure you'd actually go through with it. She pulled back and looked at me. You look really good. Is that a new sweater? Yeah, I've been buying myself things lately. Turns out I like having nice stuff. Good. You deserve nice things. She took the wine bottles. These look fancy. They are. I figured if I'm going to be here, might as well have good wine. She laughed and ushered me inside. The house smelled exactly like Thanksgiving always smelled, turkey and herbs and that particular combination of butter and onions that meant stuffing was happening. In the kitchen, my mother was at the stove, stirring something in a large pot. She turned when she heard us and her face lit up. Tori, she said, setting down the spoon and coming to hug me. I'm so happy you're here. Thanks, Mom. I hugged her back, letting myself feel it. Whatever else was complicated, she was still my mother, and I'd missed her. Can I get you something to drink? Coffee? Wine? We have that sparkling cider you used to like. Coffee would be great. I'll get it, Mandy said quickly. You two go sit down. I've got the kitchen under control. My mother looked surprised but pleased. Are you sure? Positive. Go visit with your daughter. We went to the living room and sat on the couch where I'd sat 1,000 times before. The room was decorated for fall, small pumpkins and gourds arranged on the mantel, a bowl of nuts on the coffee table, family photos on the walls, including several from Mandy's wedding. I noticed there was also a new photo I hadn't seen before, one of me from several years ago at some family gathering laughing at something off camera. It was in a nice frame prominently displayed. I found that one last month, Mom said, following my gaze. I realized I didn't have enough current photos of you up. I'm trying to fix that. It's a good picture. You look happy in it. Genuinely happy. She paused. I want you to be that happy again. I want to be part of making that possible instead of making it harder. Mandy brought my coffee, made exactly the way I liked it, and then excused herself back to the kitchen. My mother and I sat in comfortable enough silence for a moment before she spoke again. I've been doing some thinking, she said, about patterns, about how things worked in this family after your father died. Yeah, I put too much on you. You were 20 years old and I made you responsible for keeping everything together because I couldn't. And then I never released you from that role even after I got steadier. I just kept expecting you to be the capable one, the one who handled things, and I stopped seeing the cost of that. It was really hard, Mom. I know. I'm starting to know. I don't think I fully understood until you weren't here. Until I had to actually step up and handle things myself. She twisted her hands in her lap. When you didn't come to the wedding, my first reaction was anger. How could you do this to your sister, to the family, to me? But then you were just gone and we had to figure everything out without you. And I realized how much we'd all been leaning on you. How much I'd been taking for granted. I felt invisible, I said quietly. Like I only mattered for what I could do, not for who I was. That's a terrible way to feel. Especially from your family. Especially from me. She reached over and took my hand. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm so sorry I made you feel that way. You deserved better. I felt tears threatening but blinked them back. Thank you for saying that. I mean it. And I'm going to keep working on doing better, not just saying it. I know trust gets rebuilt through actions, not words. We sat there holding hands for a few minutes, not needing to fill the silence with anything else. It wasn't complete healing, but it was real, and real mattered more than perfect. The rest of the family started arriving around one. Aunt Peggy and Uncle Richard came first, carrying the infamous sweet potato casserole and a pumpkin pie from Costco. Aunt Peggy saw me on the couch and froze for just a moment, clearly not certain how to proceed. Then she set down the casserole and came over. Tori, she said. It's good to see you. You too, Aunt Peggy. I want to apologize for some things I said. Some judgments I made that weren't fair or kind. I'm glad you're here. It wasn't effusive and it wasn't particularly warm, but coming from Aunt Peggy, it was significant. Thank you. I appreciate that. She nodded and moved on to greet my mother, but something had shifted. The dynamic had adjusted in some small but meaningful way. Brittany and Derek arrived next, along with Derek's girlfriend whose name I could never remember. Brittany made a point of coming to sit with me, which felt deliberately generous. "Hey," she said. "I'm really glad you came. And I'm sorry about what I said at the Labor Day thing. That was shitty of me." "Yeah, it was. I was drunk and being catty and I said something cruel. It wasn't true and I shouldn't have said it regardless. You're not an embarrassment. You're actually probably the most accomplished person in this family and we've all been weirdly threatened by that." I looked at her, surprised by the self-awareness. "Thank you for saying that. I mean it. And for the record, what you did for Mandy's wedding was incredible. I don't think any of us could have done something that generous. I hope I don't have to do it again." She laughed. "Fair enough. But still. It was really something." As more family arrived, I found myself settling into the gathering in a way I hadn't in years. I wasn't running around refilling drinks or checking on food or managing the invisible logistics. I was just there, present as a person rather than as a function. Mandy had clearly briefed everyone because multiple family members made a point of not asking me to do things, even simple things like grabbing something from the kitchen. It was almost comically obvious, but I appreciated the effort. Dinner was called around 3. We all crowded around the extended dining table, chairs borrowed from various rooms to accommodate everyone. I ended up between Mandy and my grandmother Dot, who'd arrived late after getting lost on the way from her hotel. "Tori," Grandma Dot said, patting my hand, "I heard you went to Sedona during the wedding. How was it?" "It was beautiful, Grandma. Exactly what I needed." "Good for you. Sometimes you need to choose yourself. People who love you will understand eventually." She said it matter-of-factly, not as judgment on anyone else, just as statement of truth. I squeezed her hand gratefully. My mother stood to make a toast before we ate, something she did every year. Usually it was a general statement about gratitude and family. This year she looked directly at me. "I'm grateful we're all here," she said. "And I'm especially grateful for second chances. For the opportunity to do better, to see each other more clearly, to build something stronger than what we had before. I'm grateful for Tori, who taught us this year about boundaries and self-respect, and the importance of actually valuing the people we love instead of just assuming they'll always be there." Several people raised their glasses. "To Tori," Mandy said, and others echoed it. I felt my face flush, but I raised my glass too. "To family," I said, "and to figuring out how to do it better." We ate and talked and laughed, and it felt surprisingly normal. Not perfect, there were still awkward moments and old patterns trying to reassert themselves, but overall it felt different. Lighter somehow. More honest. After dinner, as people were settling into their traditional food comas or gathering for board games, Mandy pulled me aside. "Can we talk for a minute? Outside?" We grabbed jackets and went out to the back patio. The same patio where we'd had countless conversations growing up. The sun was setting, the November air crisp and clean. "I wanted to give you something," Mandy said, pulling an envelope from her jacket pocket. "It's not everything, not even close, but it's a start." I opened the envelope. Inside was a check for $5,000. "Mandy, you didn't have to." "Yes, I did. I owe you $37,900. This is me starting to pay that back. I got a bonus at work and instead of spending it on furniture or a vacation, I'm giving it to you. Because you were right. I took from you and never gave back, and that stops now." I looked at the check, then at my sister. "Thank you. This means a lot. There'll be more. Maybe not big chunks like this, but I set up an automatic transfer. $300 a month going into your account. It's going to take a long time to pay it all back, but I'm committed. The money matters, but the intention matters more. I know. And I want you to know that I'm in therapy and I'm working on the deeper stuff too. The taking people for granted thing. The centering my needs above everyone else's. All of it. How's that going?" She laughed ruefully. "It's hard. Turns out I have some pretty deep stuff around wanting to be the center of attention because I felt invisible after Dad died. Which is ironic because I made you invisible to compensate. We all dealt with losing him differently. Yeah, but I dealt with it by making you into a replacement parent and then resenting you for it while also depending on you. That's pretty messed up." "It is. But you're recognizing it now. That's something." We stood there in the cold for a few more minutes, watching the last light fade from the sky. Inside, through the windows, we could see our family moving around, the warm glow of home and togetherness. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours and we were figuring out how to make it better. Over the following months, things continued to shift. Slowly, incrementally, but genuinely. My mother started calling just to talk, not because she needed something. She asked about my life, my work, my pottery class, and actually listened to the answers. We started having lunch once a week, just the two of us, rebuilding our relationship outside the context of family obligations. Mandy kept up her monthly payments and her therapy. We developed a routine of video calls every Sunday evening where we'd catch up on the week, and she made a conscious effort to ask about my life as much as she shared about hers. When she needed advice, she asked if I had the bandwidth to give it rather than just assuming. It was small, but it mattered. Aunt Peggy remained Aunt Peggy, which was fine. We weren't going to be close, but she stopped making cutting remarks about my life choices and started asking genuine questions about my work. That was enough. The biggest surprise was Brittany. She'd reached out a few weeks after Thanksgiving to ask if I wanted to grab coffee, and we'd started meeting up every few weeks. Turned out when she wasn't performing for her mother or the family, she was actually interesting and funny and dealing with her own stuff around never feeling good enough for Aunt Peggy's impossible standards. "I think I was mean to you because I was jealous," she admitted one afternoon over lattes. "You got out from under it somehow. You stopped caring what Aunt Peggy or anyone else thought. I'm still trying to figure out how to do that." "Therapy helps," I said. "And getting some distance. And realizing that their opinions don't define you." "Working on all of the above," she said. "Thanks for giving me another chance." Work continued well. The product launch had been successful, and I'd gotten recognition for my contributions. In January, I was offered a promotion to lead developer with a significant raise. I accepted and used part of the extra money to book a trip to Iceland for April, the place I'd originally thought about going during the wedding. Better late than never. I went on more dates, some good, some terrible, all of them teaching me something about what I wanted and didn't want. In March, I met someone, a teacher named Marcus who was kind and funny, and had his own healthy boundaries with his family. It was early, but it felt different from relationships I'd had before. Less desperate, more genuine. Harper remained my constant, the friend who'd never wavered, who'd supported me through all of it without judgment. We celebrated my promotion with expensive cocktails, and she told me she'd never been prouder of anyone. "You did it," she said, raising her glass. "You completely rebuilt your relationship with your family on your terms. That's incredible." "I didn't do it alone. They had to be willing to change too." "Sure, but you created the conditions that made change necessary. You set the boundary and held it. That takes serious strength." By the time Mandy's first anniversary rolled around in late September, almost a year since the wedding I hadn't attended, things felt genuinely different. She called me a month before to ask if I'd come to an anniversary dinner she and Eric were hosting, small and casual, just family and close friends. "Of course I'll come," I said without hesitation. "Really? You don't need to think about it?" "Really? Things are different now. You're different. I'm different. We're building something better." The anniversary dinner was at their apartment, nothing fancy, just good food and conversation with people who actually wanted to be there. At one point, Mandy stood up to make a toast, something she'd clearly prepared. "A year ago, we got married in the most beautiful ceremony," she said, looking at Eric with obvious love. "But the wedding wasn't perfect because someone really important wasn't there." "Tori, I know I've said this before, but I need to say it again in front of everyone. Thank you for everything you did to make that day possible. Thank you for being generous even when we didn't deserve it. And thank you for setting boundaries that forced all of us to be better family members. This year has been about growth and honestly and actually showing up for each other, and a lot of that started because you said no. So thank you." Everyone raised their glasses. I felt emotional but not sad, moved but not wounded. This finally was what family was supposed to feel like. Seen and valued and appreciated not for what I could provide but for who I was. Later that evening, as I was getting ready to leave, my mother pulled me aside. She handed me a small wrapped box. "This isn't much," she said, "but I found it when I was going through some of your father's things and I thought you should have it." I unwrapped the box. Inside was a small leather journal, identical to the ones my father had kept for years. Tucked inside was a note in his handwriting. "For Tori," it read. "For when she's ready to write her own story." I looked at my mother confused. When did he give you this? He didn't. I found it in his desk after he died, already wrapped with your name on it. I think he meant to give it to you for graduation or something, but he ran out of time. I've been holding on to it, waiting for the right moment. This feels like it. I held the journal, feeling the weight of it, the intention behind it. My father, even in death, somehow knowing I'd need permission to write my own story, to step out of the roles everyone else assigned. Thank you, Mom. He'd be proud of you. I'm proud of you. I drove home that night with the journal on the passenger seat, this gift from my father that had waited years to reach me. When I got to my apartment, I made tea and sat on my couch and opened it to the first blank page. Then I picked up a pen and started writing. Not about the wedding or the exclusion or any of the pain. Just about now. About the life I was building, the boundaries I was holding, the relationships I was reconstructing on terms that honored everyone involved. About pottery classes and trips to Iceland and Sunday phone calls with my sister that felt real. About showing up for Thanksgiving and being seen. About choosing myself and having that choice respected. I wrote until my hand cramped and my tea went cold. When I finally stopped, I had filled 10 pages with observations and thoughts and hopes for what came next. I closed the journal and set it on my coffee table where I'd see it every day. A reminder that my story was mine to write. The empty chair at Mandy's wedding had represented absence, loss, exclusion. But it had also represented choice. The choice to value myself enough to walk away from dynamics that diminished me. The choice to believe I deserved better. The choice to hold space for my own needs instead of making myself small to accommodate everyone else's. And that choice, as painful as it had been to make, had changed everything. Not instantly, not magically, but gradually, honestly. It had forced conversations that needed to happen. It had revealed who was willing to do the work of real relationship and who wasn't. It had given me back to myself. A year after the wedding I didn't attend, I was standing in my apartment looking out at the Denver skyline with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. My family wasn't perfect. I wasn't perfect. But we were trying, genuinely trying, to see each other and value each other and build something based on mutual respect rather than obligation. And I had learned the most important lesson of all. That being the family embarrassment, the one who didn't fit the mold they created, wasn't a failure. It was freedom. Freedom to define myself on my own terms. Freedom to set boundaries and expect them to be honored. Freedom to choose how much of myself I gave and to whom. The rocks in Sedona were still standing, ancient and unmoved by human drama. The journal my father left me was still on my coffee table, pages filling slowly with my own story. My sister's monthly payments still arrived like clockwork, less about the money than about the commitment they represented. My mother still called every week, learning how to be a mother to an adult daughter rather than depending on one. And me? I was still here. Not invisible. Not infrastructure. Not the family embarrassment or the reliable one or any other role that had been assigned to me. Just Tori. Imperfect in boundary setting and learning daily how to take up space in my own life. The empty chair had been filled, but not in the way anyone expected. It had been filled with presence, with self-respect, with the understanding that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and your family is to refuse to disappear into the roles they need you to play. I thought about that often, usually when I was hiking or sitting on my balcony or writing in my journal. The paradox that my absence had made me more present, that walking away had brought us closer, that saying no had opened space for real yes. Christmas came and I went to that too, showing up with boundaries intact and actually enjoying myself. Easter followed and Mandy's birthday, and a random Tuesday in May when Mom called just to tell me she'd seen a bird that reminded her of me, bright and particular and unmistakably itself. Life wasn't perfect. Families never were. But it was real, and real was what I'd been missing all along. Real acknowledgement, real appreciation, real relationships where everyone brought something and nobody disappeared. The story didn't end with dramatic confrontation or perfect resolution. It ended with slow repair and maintained boundaries and the daily choice to honor myself while staying connected to people I loved. It ended with understanding that I could be generous without being a doormat, loving without being invisible, part of a family without losing myself. And that finally was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.